Hi, my name is Beth, and I'm a programming assistant for the St. Johns County Public Library. And I'm here at the Historical Society in downtown St. Augustine on the corner of Avalese Street and Artillery Lane um, to learn a little bit of local history. So I'm glad you could join me. I'm going to be going inside to speak with local historian Bob Naraki, who's going to tell me a little bit about life in the Lincolnville community in the 1920s, and also specifically about the life and work of photographer Richard Twine. Mr. Twine took photographs of the African American community in Lincolnville during the 1920s, so I'm very excited to see some photographs, hear some stories, and get a little preview of an exhibit they'll be doing here at the Historical Society in February. This program is part of a year-long celebration that we are having to commemorate St. Johns County's 200th anniversary that is happening throughout 2021. So we're very excited to learn more about our county, St. Johns County, and I'm excited to see what Mr. Naraki is going to show us inside. So let's go. Hi, Bob. Thanks so much for joining me today. Can you please tell me a little bit about who Richard Twine was?
Sure. Like most good stories, this starts off with a mystery.
Oh.
It goes back to 1988, and some workmen were tearing down a house in Lincolnville, 107 Kings Ferry Way. The house had burned down, and in going through the house, they discovered two boxes of camera and photographic equipment, some sticks, as they say, probably a tripod, and took one of the boxes and one of the cameras to a camera store in town and sold them for beer money. Traditionally, if you watch Antiques Roadshow, that's what they all do. Everybody goes to an old empty house and sells stuff. So that when the owner of the store went through the material, he discovered that there were glass plate negatives in there. There was an old camera, and he thought that the Historical Society would be interested in. So he contacted Ken Barrett, who was a professor at Flagler College and also worked as a part-time curator here at the Society, and told him about it. So Ken bought the materials, brought them to the Society, and started taking a look through them. And even though these glass plate negatives were dirty, I mean, they'd been up in an attic for many years, dusty, soot covered, and in some cases damaged by the heat, he discovered that there were a remarkable collection of images of Lincolnville in the 1920s. So he started to investigate a little bit further. We found a box that had an envelope in it that had Richard Aloysius Twine's name on it, and came to the assumption that, gee, possibly this is the photographer. So some research was done, and in 1922, Richard Twine is listed as one of two photographers in St. Augustine. He was the only one who was in the Lincolnville area, so the assumption was that's who it was. He began, as Ken Barrett began to clean these glass plates and work on them, he realized that the photographer had a lot of talent, a lot of skill, and these were really some amazing photographs of an area of St. Augustine we really have very little photographic evidence of. It was not an area where people took a lot of photographs. I can show you hundreds and thousands of photographs of the fort, Constitution Plaza, and the city gate, but Lincolnville, very few. So the society at that time decided the smartest thing to do would be to do some additional research and try to find out who are these people. Why did we have these photographs? So two individuals, Diana Edwards and Dr. Patricia Griffin, undertook a fairly long, probably about a year and a half study of trying to find out who these people were. So we obtained a grant, and the first thing, as I said, Ken Barrett had to do was to go through these negatives and very patiently, very carefully clean them. Just so you know, this is what a glass plate negative looks like. It's been exposed, but it's a piece of glass. There's emulsion on it. You place that in a camera, expose it, and then you have to use a lot of chemicals in order to be able to have an image. A far cry from the iPhones we're using right now, which do all the work for us. In those days, it didn't do any of the work for you. You had to learn how to do it yourself. So very carefully, he and several students from Flagler College worked on cleaning these plates and trying to get them in the best possible condition. They then had to get some equipment in order to be able to expose these plates to print them. And once they printed them, Dr. Edwards and Dr. Griffin went out into the community and began to ask people in Lincolnville, do you know who these people are? Do you have more information about them, etc. And it really turned into an exciting community event. People would gather together, they would start telling stories, and Dr. Edwards and Dr. Griffin were just scribbling like mad, trying to record all of this information. But the end result was most of the photographs have been identified, most of the people have been identified. And it told us more about Lincolnville, but also about Richard Twine. Richard Twine was born in 1896. He was born here in St. Augustine. We found some information recently that probably around 1916, 1917, when he would have been about 20 years of age, he moved up to New York City and lived there for about 3 or 4 years. We think he was a hotel porter. Very common in those days for Southern African Americans to go north for jobs. There were a lot more opportunities up there, higher pay, then they could come back and live off some of those earnings. Came back in 1922 and opened up a photography studio on Washington Street. Worked there for about 4 or 5 years, and these glass plates are part of the result of that. We think there was more. One of the workmen said there was another box and some other material, but they never showed up with it, and we've never been able to track down that other box. In the late 19 teens and early 1920s was the beginning of the Harlem Renaissance, when there was a great outpouring of culture among the African American community in New York City. So Twine would have been there sort of right at the very beginnings of it. So we're wondering whether he got involved in that, and that's where he picked up his photography skills. But we don't know. It's just a black hole. But what we do know from some of the folks who lived with Twine and knew Twine, he was more than just a photographer. He was an active parishioner at St. Benedict de Moors Church. He staged plays. He wrote plays. He directed little movies. And was very involved in the culture. So he was a sort of his own little St. Augustine Harlem Renaissance here in town. His 2 brothers had started a billiard parlor here in town, and had also started a restaurant. And in the late 1920s, they moved to Miami, which at that point was the big mecca. Whole South Florida was just exploding. So they went down there, opened up some businesses. In 1926, 1927, Richard moved with them. What's fascinating is he was involved in their businesses, in their restaurants, and in the Twine enterprises. Then moved on to hotels, worked at various hotels, and from what we've been able to tell, in the later years of his life, he ran a boarding house down in Miami. What's fascinating is after these 5 years here in town, being a photographer, it does not appear he ever picked up a camera again.
Oh, wow.
There's no evidence that he tried to start a photographic business down there, that he tried to do it. If he did take photographs, we don't have any existence of them. So what we have here is a small amount, about 104 negatives, are just a small outpouring of the work he has, but it's a very important collection because it documents Lincolnville in the 1920s. And as I said before, we don't have a lot of documentation, particularly visual documentation, in Lincolnville at that time. So what we're hoping to do this February, at the Page Edwards Gallery at the Society, we will be having a small exhibition of Twine's work. And I hope over the next year and a half, that we're going to be able to create a nice digital presence of all of Twine's work.
Oh, that would be amazing.
So it's going to be really kind of exciting. We hope that this will help us and help groups like the Lincolnville Museum and other groups to really begin to document and to collect more about the history of Lincolnville. Because I think it's important to remember, you go down certain streets today, you go down Washington Street, St. Francis House, it's a little run down. You go down Central Avenue, there's some not so nice places. It's become an area of gentrification, of houses being torn down and new ones being put up. And yet in the 1920s, before desegregation, Lincolnville was a community. It was primarily African American. They had a number of businesses there, including dry cleaners, tailors, food stores, feed stores, all sorts of things. So, and this is where the community shopped, and while they were African Americans throughout St. Augustine, this was probably the locus of where they went to shop, went to do things, went to purchase things. You had St. Benedict the Moorish church there, St. Cyprian's. So that was really the hub of the African American community for the most part, which is not to say that there wasn't some mingling of the races. On Bridge Street was a ice cream place called the Iceberg, or the Berg, and had satin finish ice cream, supposed to be the best ice cream in St. Augustine. And I've been told that, yes, folks, you would get whites and blacks going in there to buy ice cream. We also had Snyder's grocery store, which once again also had folks. But you also had Frank Butler's grocery store. Frank Butler was an African American entrepreneur, developed different developments, Butler Beach. So it's a representation of what Lincolnville was. There were multiple economic classes. Of course, you had laborers, folks who worked on the railroad, etc. Had a middle class. You had Mrs. Martin, who was actually wealthy, to the extent that she had a chauffeur and a limousine.
Nice.
So we're lucky we have a couple pictures of her. So these are an amazing collection of photographs, and I'd be happy to show you some of these.
Yes, I would love to see some.
So here's a glass plate image that was taken by Richard Twine. And as you can see, it's a negative. And to get an idea of what it looks like, we can place it here on this light box. And this would have been in Twine's studio, which was, I think, on 62 Washington, up on the second floor. And as you can see, this chair is a chair that, as you look through his collection, you'll find it was used many times.
Got the beautiful 1920s clothing.
Yeah.
Really nice. The collars and...
Well, this is why I love photographs, because they tell you so much, not only about the person, but the clothing, what people dressed. And here's an actual image. This is what the image looked like. So, as this says, it was probably taken after church, described as a Catholic crowd. And out of the 14 individuals, we have about 12 to 13 identified.
That's pretty good.
Yeah.
That's better than some of my family photographs.
You and me both. So here is Richard Twine. This is our photographer of Lincolnville.
He's a handsome gentleman.
Yes, he was. So it's a self-portrait he took.
Nice. Very nice.
And you can see that this is a direct contact print, so this, you can see how along the edges here there's been some damage. And here's this is a great hat, very beautiful. This is Otis Mason's mother.
Oh, wow.
And as
She was really pretty.
Yeah. So you can see this is the backdrop. He had a little backdrop and a table.
Very nice.
And we don't know who these two women are, but they certainly look old enough that they probably were former slaves.
Wow.
Richard Twine's father, David, we're pretty sure was a slave, and he was a member of the colored troops during the Civil War, and his wife was able to get a pension based on that. And we presume that his mother, Harriet, was also a former slave. So Twine worked to do, this is Sanders Eccles, document happy times. So here's a wedding, the Sanders Eccles wedding.
Aww.
So you can see what a wedding dress at that time looked like. You can tell it's definitely the beginnings of the flapper era.
Mm-hmm. Really, really nice. The little flower girl.
Yeah. Bigger than my wedding was, yes.
Mine too, actually.
Yeah. But we also documented the sad times. So here's a child who passed away. And these funeral portraits were fairly common in the sense that, you would send pictures to relatives who couldn't come to the funeral.
Yeah, that's sad though.
And then this is a picture, an edited photograph. So this shows actually what Twine's studio looked like. So there you have his rug, the chair that Twine was sitting in that image. Here's his light, his backdrop. So we think he had several backdrops. But the rest of the building, just really pretty plain. I mean, here we have a crate of Maxwell House coffee serving as a table.
That's great.
So, as they say, you can do a lot with photography in the sense that makes it look like a very fancy place, and in reality, you're sitting up in a storeroom someplace.
It's all how you frame things.
Exactly. Our exhibit that we had, the Society did in 1990, the Society had an exhibit of Twine's photographs. And because we were able to get a grant, and it toured around the state. So here's a poster that was done for that.
Really neat.
Yeah.
That's that same rug, I think.
Same rug, same chair.
Very cool.
I mean,
do we know who that is in the photo?
yes, we do.
Who is
Hold on a
that?
sec. Let me just, I gotta go cheat. This is Leroy Parsons,
Leroy Parsons.
son of Gus and Ann Parsons.
Very cool. Well, that's really...
I mean, he's a sharp dresser.
Yeah, I think everybody was a pretty sharp dresser in these photos. Yeah, that's really neat. Well, thank you so much for sharing these images with us and the story of Mr. Twine in Lincolnville in the 1920s. And I hope we can come back and talk to you again sometime soon.
You're welcome anytime.
All right, thank you so much.
Sure
Take
thing.
care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
If you are interested in learning a little bit more about some of the subjects Mr. Naraki was just discussing, come by the St. Johns County Public Library. We have all kinds of resources, including the Ellis Grabano Journal. Issue number 53 has an article about Richard Twine in it, and in fact, here's one of his photographs is on the cover of the journal. We have a book called Lincolnville, a sketchbook journal by Rosamond Parrish that has some really nice drawings of some of the houses in the Lincolnville neighborhood. We have a book called Frank B. Butler by Barbara Walsh that is about this businessman from Lincolnville that Mr. Naraki was just telling us about. And even this book, Black Miami in the 20th Century, that might give you a little bit of insight into what life in Miami would have been like when Richard Twine moved there in the 1920s. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. I learned a lot, and I hope you did as well. Please stay tuned to the St. Augustine Historical Society's website to learn more about when they'll be having this Richard Twine exhibit that's coming here in February. Also, please keep watching the St. Johns County's Public Library's website, our Facebook page, and our YouTube channel for more great programming. Thanks again so much, and we'll see you soon at the library.